welcome to Two Steps Ahead Podcast. Two Steps Ahead Podcast, highlighting the stuff we've stepped in so you, my friend, don't have to. My name is Son Edom, alongside somebody who turns into this big, green, angry machine. Sarah Hochiro, when she gets mad.
Hey, guys.
She becomes
Welcome
the
back.
Incredible Hulkus.
Hocus.
Hulk? Like
Hulkus?
instead of the Hulk, what's the female? You know, like they have Hunter and Huntress.
Well, my
Hulk
maiden
and Hulkress.
my maiden name is Hoke,
It
so I
is.
was trying to make a
Ooh,
pun.
The Incredible Hulk.
There you go.
Oh, I like that.
The Incredible
Hulk. Now, we're going to be talking about today with the Incredible Hulk, anger. We're going to talk about issues of anger. And not that we have any.
No, never.
But I have to deal with it every time we record. You should see the stuff that flies through the studios. No, but we're going to talk about anger because it's something that is starting to see, I don't want to say becoming more prevalent, but it's something that we all have to deal with, especially when things don't go our way or when we struggle with things. And sometimes it becomes a coping method, or sometimes it becomes a reactionary thing. And so it's just something that we're going to kind of dwell on today, is that topic of anger. So that way we can just kind of share the stuff that we've gone through. So hopefully, like we've said in the beginning, we go through it. Hopefully you learn from us and can avoid some of those angry mistakes that Tara makes all the time. No, but it was something that came up because you started the, you posted something on social media that brought about the idea of the topic. And
I did.
It was a laundry list of things that sometimes people might not often think about that go along with anger. Sometimes we think anger is just being mad. And that's it. You know, somebody does something to me, so I'm mad. But there could be a lot of underlying issues that go along with it that we don't really relate to anger.
Right. So anger is secondary. It's not the root. It's not the origin. So there's always something underneath. Anger is a reaction to something else. So it could be fear. It could be embarrassment, rejection. It could be something that we see in society like rape or violence that could make us angry. And those are the things that we should be angry at. Or it could be a personal loss of control, a personal incident that we have gone through. It could be any number of things that cause a reaction of anger. So anger in and of itself isn't a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a reaction. But then what we do with that anger, how we handle that anger and use it, that's when it becomes either healthy or unhealthy. And that's when it becomes either destructive, making the situation worse, or when it becomes helpful in making the situation better.
So there, you said, because I was thinking there's right anger and wrong anger, but there could be righteous anger and unrighteous anger, because you mentioned I could be mad at a series of events that I saw take place. And that might be a righteous anger, to be upset and to be mad about an event that happened, maybe an injustice or something happened to somebody else. Or if I get hurt and somebody hurts me, or something happens, and so I get mad at somebody because they destroyed something of mine or crashed the car, whatever. That might be an unrighteous anger, just because you're lashing out in a manner that might not be appropriate.
I would say, rather than using right or wrong or righteous or unrighteous, I would say healthy or unhealthy.
Okay, so healthy or unhealthy.
Because anger is a valid reaction. It's valid. And a lot of times we're taught, especially for some reason in the Christian circles, that anger is a bad thing, or that we're not supposed to be angry. It's not, anger isn't, God is angry. Jesus was angry. It's not that we shouldn't be angry. It's that we shouldn't use anger in a destructive way. So when we're lashing out, that would be unhealthy. If we're judging people or using labels against people or condemning, that would be unhealthy. If we're, fighting back, tit for tat, that would be unhealthy. But when we see things that are not, that are damaging, like rape or violence or child abuse or whatever, we can use that anger as fuel to make things better. There's a whole bunch of things that we can do to make the situation better. And that would be a healthy way to use anger.
So when you talk about healthy anger and being angry from a healthy perspective, there still has to be some checks, I would think, in there, because we don't want to take that healthy anger and then our actions move it to an unhealthy reaction. So again, because you mentioned something like a rape or some violence towards somebody else, we can get angry about that, but then oftentimes our anger could want us to lash out. And so our healthy anger then becomes an unhealthy behavior. So there has to be a little bit of a balance or a little bit of check there, so we don't take what's good and move it into the bad. So if we do have a healthy anger towards something, then how could we maybe use that in an appropriate way and appropriate, because I think anger would have to be something that you still have to get out. Like you can't keep it inside you because then you internalize it. So it has to be an emotion that would have to come out somehow.
Right.
So what would be a good way to express that healthy anger so that it doesn't move into the unhealthy?
So I'll give a specific example. Somebody actually responded to my Instagram post asking, what about what about abuse? Now, they were not specific what type of abuse. They didn't say emotional or verbal or physical. They just said abuse. And they were asking, shouldn't the abused person stand up for themselves, and what kind of anger would occur in that situation if they were to, and they used the words fight back. So I'm not sure, they weren't specific about what they meant by fight back. So I just kind of answered, in a more general way. So let's say, for example, someone is being physically abused. That's definitely something to be angry about. And if you are the one being abused, there are, obviously you want to get yourself to safety first and foremost. You don't want to live in a situation years and years and years and years and years in an abusive situation. I happen to know a little bit of background about this person, so I'm assuming that was the case, that they had lived in a family of origin of abuse. So there's this tendency to make the abuser the most powerful being, right? And then everyone else is a victim. The only way that we are a victim is if we choose to be. Now, I know that there's a lot of economic reasons. There's a lot of social reasons. There's many, many reasons why people stay where they are. But at the end of the day, we need to choose to get out of that situation. So if we need to call the police, if we need to talk to the community around us, our friends, our family, our neighbors, get some help somewhere so that we can get out of that abusive situation. Because even in an example of like verbal abuse or emotional abuse, it's like I've said this before, if someone is a jerk, they can be a jerk all day long on their side of the fence. They have the right to do that. But if we give them the key to our yard and we allow them on our side of the fence, now we are part of the problem. Now we are an enabler. We are codependent. We are choosing to complain about the abuse on one side and then choosing to participate in it on the other. And so, of course, the person's going to be angry, right? There's going to be a lot of frustration in there because there's a lack of control. There's shame. There's all kinds of things involved, and that makes us very angry. But a healthy way to do it is to set those boundaries by calling the authorities, getting the community involved, asking our friends and neighbors for help, going to a support group, going to a therapist. There's any number of ways to get people around you to strengthen you, to get you out of that situation. So an unhealthy way to handle an unhealthy anger in that situation would be, as this person suggested, to fight back. And I wouldn't suggest that, because all that does is going to bring more. It's either going to bring more arguing, more verbal abuse, more physical abuse, So the healthy anger makes the situation safer and better. Not necessarily that the other person is going to like it, because nobody likes a boundary set against them. But ultimately, it will make you, safer and healthier. And an unhealthy way would just to be retaliate, to seek vengeance, revenge. That is just making you both go down the drain together.
Now, you mentioned shame.
Mm-hmm.
And we covered shame on a previous podcast not too long ago, overcoming shame. And again, remind us, are we talking about the same shame? Remind us about the definition of shame when we used it in the last podcast.
Guilt is something that I've done wrong, and shame is I am something wrong.
So when you talk about shame in anger, is it the same definition? Like you're still talking about yourself? Right.
So anger is a reaction to something underneath. So if we have shame underneath, that means that it sounds like this. I must not be worthy of their love. Why am I not worthy enough for someone to choose me to date or to marry? What is wrong with me that is causing this person to treat me the way that they're treating me? All those are shame statements. And it keeps us in a victim stance. So no, we don't deserve to be treated that way, but unless we stand up for ourselves, they're going to keep doing it. So, and then the shame comes because we're deep down, we know that we're allowing it, we're participating in it. And I've heard, people say, well, I've done everything I could, so I'm just going to get a divorce. Well, in their mind, doing everything they could means having the house spick and span when the person walks in the door so they don't blow up, not asking questions, not using your voice, tiptoeing around a discussion so it doesn't turn into an argument so the person doesn't hit you. That's not doing everything that you can. That's enabling. That's just being very codependent. So doing everything that you can is saying, no, I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm going to go get help. You can come with me, but if you don't want to, I'm going to go get help anyway. I'm going to move out, or you move out, or, just having enough self-worth to stand up for yourself. And when we don't stand up for ourselves, that brings on more shame. And then that other person is bringing shame on us. Anytime we say, have those feelings of not good enough, not smart enough, what's wrong with me? Those are all shame-based statements.
So we could have anger towards ourselves.
Exactly.
Too, because not only angry at the situation, but we have anger towards ourselves. So then we just become angry altogether, which then leads us down a spiral path of just kind of who knows where it can go, but it's not going to be good.
No.
And it depends on how we handle it. But it's almost like there has to be a way for us to kind of understand the anger that we are experiencing. Because like you said, a lot of times we're taught that anger is bad regardless. And that's not always the case. Again, we've talked about many things where people like to think in terms of black and white, right or wrong, absolutes. But a lot of times we're finding out there's a lot of what we like to call, or what I like to call, gray areas where it's not always right or wrong or this or that. It could be a little bit of both. And so again, if we have shame or we're angry towards ourselves for something that someone else is maybe causing, because we think we're the problem, then we need to maybe realize that the anger towards ourselves isn't necessarily healthy because we're focusing on us as the problem when we might not be the problem. The problem might be something else that's causing us to internalize it. Because if we're shaming, if someone is doing something and we feel that we're the problem and we're not, and so we have this shame about us, and so we get angry at ourselves for allowing it to happen, for being in the situation, for whatever the case may be, then we might lash out to somebody else and be angry towards anything else except the source of the problem. So I guess I'm getting at is we have to kind of understand where our anger is coming from and what it's about in order to truly combat it.
Yeah, and I think the anger towards ourselves comes later. And I think we have an anger towards ourselves, but we don't want to acknowledge that we have an anger towards ourselves, because then what do? I mean, we go with us everywhere we go. Yeah. right? So if we're carrying all this anger, like, I don't want to be with this for, well, you don't have a choice. You're taking yourself everywhere. So a lot of times we don't acknowledge, or we don't want to acknowledge the anger at ourselves. And so we project it out onto, like, they're the problem there. And that's when that victim mentality comes in. And so we need to get to the point where we are angry at ourselves so that we can change the proper place. Because if we're in an argument and I'm angry at you, but I'm not acknowledging my part in it, then I can't change my part in it. You're the jerk and I'm the victim. So we do need to get to that point where the anger turns in a healthy way towards ourselves so that we can be like, dude, girl, what are you doing? Like, why are you allowing this person to treat you this way? And so I gave the example several podcasts ago about when my parents got divorced, or when things started happening when I was young, and I wasn't given permission to be angry. So that stuffed anger, of course, causes more anger because it causes, so my feelings were not valid, right? Like, this was wrong. Some of the things that were going on were just wrong. And I wasn't allowed to call it out and say, this is wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. I didn't have permission to do that. So as I grew up and when I came around other adults that were divorced, I lashed out at them. I didn't have permission to be angry at my parents. So anybody that was divorced, anybody that had any type of marital problems, I was super angry at you. And it could be a complete stranger. But if I heard someone talking about them being divorced, I was just super angry. And I would take all that out. And that's an unhealthy way to handle it. It's not I don't know what their story is. I don't have a right to be angry at them. But because I didn't deal with the root problem, because of the origin, I didn't have a voice. I didn't have control. which made me angry. And then I wasn't allowed to express a very valid feeling, very valid emotion. So then it turned into something super unhealthy. So a lot of times if we can allow people around us to be angry at and acknowledge that it's a valid emotion, but then look underneath of it and say, well, what's causing this anger? That's when you start getting to the healing, and that's when you start getting to the root of the problem, and then you can really address what's really going on.
See, because I think that's one of the things that, we struggle with is we struggle with understanding what it is that's causing it, because we often go straight to the I shouldn't be angry because it's wrong.
Exactly.
And then, like you said, that just kind of escalates the anger into other things, lashing out, and then other behavior follows. And so if we have an understanding of what it is and realizing that it could be okay. I mean, we live in a society where there's always something on the news or something that goes on in our lives. Like you said, maybe there's people that that are going through something. In your example, it was divorce, and that would like kind of trigger you to get angry. So there's always something going on that's going to make us upset and make us angry. And it could be something, like you said, that's healthy, but it could be unhealthy. We just have to determine that. But we have to understand what it is that is causing us this. I remember there's times, like for me, here's a trivial example, but it's kind of relevant. It's been peaceful driving the freeways as of late because nobody's been on it, but because I get upset with the way people drive. Okay. Now I'm sure that's an unhealthy anger, but that just happens because I look at things, like I've mentioned before, I kind of look at things through logic and reason. That's how I try to view things. And so if I'm on the freeway and I'm cruising along and there's a car in the other lane going much slower and I'm approaching that car and there's nobody in front of that car and that car just decides to get over in my lane and kind of impedes my flow of traffic, I'm going to get upset because there's no rhyme or reason for that decision to happen.
Right.
Okay. Now, again, that could be unhealthy. It could be healthy. I don't care. I just get upset. So I've been working on that because I understand that first off, it doesn't do anything to get upset and I could just go around the car. But sometimes, and I never lash out with the middle finger or anything like that. I just keep it to myself. I might shake my head as I drive by, but I don't look at the person or anything like that. I just keep it to myself. So that could be unhealthy, but it's just something that kind of becomes a continuing thing for me. And so I've tried to, so that's one area I try to work on, because a lot of people that know me know I'm pretty laid back and I really don't get too upset about things. And I really don't get too angry about things. There might be an occasional thing that comes up and I really can't think of anything off the top of my head right now. But if you look in the news, there could be things that you can get angry about. And so we have to make sure though that we get to the point where we can understand that what it is we're angry about, determine whether or not it's good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. I guess we could use those terms. And then what can we do to respond to that emotion with the full understanding that it's okay to have that emotion.
Right. So when we're feeling ourselves angry, then we need to ask ourselves, what is it that is causing me to be angry? And again, we can keep it on the surface and say something that I saw in the news. But if we keep asking ourselves, tell me more, or a person that's really angry in front of you, if you keep saying, tell me more, eventually they'll drill down to what's really going on. So something on the news might be, I feel like as a citizen, I'm losing control. I feel that I really want to work and I'm being told that I can't. And if we just keep drilling down, it's fear. It's fear of not being able to feed ourselves, fear of losing our security, in our home, fear of the unknown, right? And so rather than being angry at whatever is happening, we have to ask ourselves, okay, I do have this fear. It is a legitimate fear. It is a very valid emotion to be angry about this, but what is under my control? Because a lot of times we get so focused on what is out of our control and we focus our anger because it's almost like fun to be angry sometimes because there's a lot of energy going on. There's a lot of adrenaline pumping. There's a lot of rewards to being angry. Honestly, it's not just a zero thing, because otherwise we wouldn't get such a kick out of it. Right. So when we're really animated, there is a reward there, but we got to ask ourselves, what is under our control? And when we say that, then we can acknowledge, when we take our focus off the jerk, then we can focus on what can I do? What do I have under my control? What help do I have? What resources do I have? And I saw a lady last night on TV and she was saying, it's so hard for me to ask for help. But then when she came around to it and did ask for help from her clients and from her family and friends, they all responded immediately. So rather than having the anger directed towards out here, like someone is controlling me, we can control in here and say, I need help. It's very humiliating, but there are people who love me. There are people who support me. There are people who don't want my business to go under. And so I'm going to ask them, I'm going to appeal to them for help. And lo and behold, all this money came in to get her through for another couple of months. So that is under her control. There are things that are under our control, but when we're angry and we're making the problem out here instead of inside, of our heart, then it just goes in a very unhealthy direction.
So there's a reward in anger. I need to get angry more often. Maybe that's why I feel so good when I'm screaming down the 405 or something, because I'm feeling good about myself. No, but again, when we take a look at take a look at the emotion behind it, it always almost seems like it's almost like anger can be a secondary.
It is a secondary,
as opposed to
not the
first
origin,
one. Yeah.
Right? It's not the origin, and we focus on the secondary and have fun in the secondary. And we lash out in the secondary because it's okay. Let's just be honest. Sometimes it's fun to beat people up with our words. It makes us feel better about ourselves, right? If I can make you look like an awful person, I get satisfaction. Right. It's not a healthy satisfaction, but I do get satisfaction out of, that person's such a jerk and blah, 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 let me tell you what they did. And you just go on and on and on. And wow, man, we just feel so good about ourselves, right?
But see, I guess that's too what you often talk about is it comes down to character.
Yeah.
Character and the heart too, where whatever the heart is or how the heart is, that's how we're going to be. Mm-hmm. And then our character is also in there is how we're going to control ourselves or how we're going to handle ourselves in these situations. Mm-hmm. And so we may want to lash out at somebody. We may want to take them down with our words. We may feel invigorated by that. I may feel, some sort of reward, excitement that I'm screaming at somebody down, the 210 freeway. But is my character really one of, should I be doing that? Mm-hmm. Should I be this person that gets upset? Should I be the person that is handling it a certain way? Or should I take a step back and realize, maybe there is, because, I've never been, here's something that I'll reveal about myself, which you may or may not believe, because a lot of times people don't believe it when I say this. I've never been in a fight. I've just never been in a fight. I've never thrown a punch. Okay. I've never thrown a punch. Mm-hmm. There's been times where it's kind of escalated to that point and I just walk away. Mm-hmm. I don't have the time. I don't have the time. If you know me, I don't have the time for that. I just really don't. I don't care enough about something to get into a fist fight over it. And so I just walk away. And I hear stories about people that get into fights all the time about different things. They're just angry people. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, if you go to, so I spent some time in the Midwest working, and going to the bar on a Friday night was a common occurrence because there wasn't much else going on. So obviously I can see where fights can happen from there, because fights would happen a lot, and it's the alcohol and things like that. So that might be a little different story when you're introducing something that can influence your behavior. That's maybe a substance or something like that. So I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is you get to the point where you're so mad that you just break out in a fight. I've seen it in schools, where students go at it. In fact, I've seen it where people get in fight or they argue and get mad at each other at lunchtime. Mm-hmm. And then they will wait till after school, like 3 hours later, and then go behind the school and then punch it out. Okay. It's like, that doesn't really make much sense either. But anyways, so again, but I've never been in that situation. And so that would be something that is intriguing to me, is how is it that it gets to the point where people want to escalate to getting into a fight and throwing punches over something? Because to me, I haven't come across anything yet, fortunately, that I would get so angry about that I want to mess somebody else up. Mm-hmm.
I have a theory about that. Of course, I don't know for sure, so that's just a theory. But let me give you an example of something that I have experienced, and maybe that'll help explain it. There was a person that I heard, a person just completely massacred another person with their words, just shamed them, completely destroyed this person's soul, right? And when it was over, the person that was lashing out said, "Whew, I just feel so much better." And they were literally glowing. And the other person was completely destroyed, devastated. So, which was very hurtful to that person. So, what that tells me about that person is that that person didn't have a voice. They don't feel like they have any control in their life. So when they're lashing out at someone else, it gives them a sense of power. It gives them like, I'm being heard. My voice is being heard. Are they being effective? No, it just made it worse. But in their mind, they felt like they were being, finally they had the floor, finally they were being listened to, they had a voice and they were standing up for themselves. So when people are to the point of lashing out to the point of violence, that could be one of the reasons, is that they just don't feel like they're being heard. They don't have a voice. There's a lot of shame going on. They don't feel good enough. And so whoever it is that they're arguing with, they're not getting any satisfaction from that person. They're feeling defeated. And so they have to just keep going and just keep escalating it until they can exercise their power and exercise their control. So, you know, people that are angry, we have to stop and take a look like, okay, we could dismiss the person as a jerk, or we could really pay attention to the way that, to what they're saying in their anger, and be like, okay, this person is full of shame and they got to prove that they are worthy. Right. And so they will destroy other people in an effort to make themselves feel better and look better, which is the wrong way to do it because it just makes it worse. But that's a good part of anger, is because we have this loss of control. We have this loss of a voice. We don't feel like we are measuring up in society or that we're accepted. And so there's this constant like fight. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm going to prove it, going to prove it, going to prove it. But they're proving it in ways that are bringing harm not only to themselves, but to a lot of other people.
Okay, how about this? I've come across people in life where I've heard kind of bad things about them, dealings with them in professional, social, whatever. And people have said things, okay, when you meet this guy, this is what you're going to experience. Okay. So for example, I was working at a radio station, just kind of got there, and I was assigned to a weekend show, and everyone was warning me that the guy gets upset pretty quickly when things don't go well. And in the radio business, I mean, in the podcast business today, you know, sometimes things just don't go well when you're setting up with technology, when you're setting up with equipment, when you're dealing with, you know, trying to track down the latest, greatest news that's just breaking on the wire. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong in the radio business. And so it's never going to be a perfect thing. You can plan it and you can perfectly plan it, but to execute it takes, you know, a miracle practically to pull it off. And so this guy would go get angry to the point where he'd throw things in the studio. Okay.
Yeah.
And so they warned me about it. And so my approach to him was, I'm just going to do my job to the best that I can, and I'm not going to allow his anger to affect me. So for example, we play what they call bumper music, which is a transition between a commercial and the guy talking. We play a little bit of music. So he complained about the volume, that it was too loud. Okay, well, turn down your headphones, first of all. But okay, so I didn't worry about it. I just adjusted to make it so that it'd work. Then something else came up, and, you know, he'd get mad. And as we worked together, him getting mad never affected me because, first off, I never took it personally. And second of all, I just knew that I was continuing to do my job. So then this is where the revelation came. So eventually we got to the point where he stopped getting mad, and he would just be like, hey, this is too loud. Hey, this is this. Hey, this is this. And we would work together and fix those issues so that he would have his show work as he wants it to. Okay. So then one time I was working a basketball game. It was the Clippers. I was board opping the Clippers game, and this host also did Clippers halftime and pre and post. And so I was being trained by another guy. And this other guy and the host didn't get along. And so when the bumper music was too loud, he cranked it up.
Oh,
when it was playing too long, he played it longer. Stuff like that. So now it started to click in my mind that, okay, wait a minute. His experience in this field with people might be a certain way.
Yeah.
Then his cat died. And so I went up to him and I said, hey, dude, I'm sorry your cat, you know, passed away. And he was really close to the cat. And he was like, why are you saying that? You know, he's kind of offensive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm literally sorry your cat died. I know you're attached. So again, his experience was that people, I guess, maybe didn't like him because of his anger or whatever, or maybe the anger was a situation because of the working environment. And it got to the point so much so that one night it was amazing. We sat down, we started talking. He was telling me his whole life story. And we sat there for hours, and someone kind of noticed that we were talking, and they were like, how can you talk to him for that long? I'm like, dude, the guy he's a cool guy. And then another time in another working environment, there was a situation where I had to go into upper management, and I was told, hey, watch out, this guy's a bulldog, this guy's this guy will tell you apart, da 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 da. And I walked in there and I was like, hey, what's up? And it wasn't going good for me. I mean, it wasn't a good meeting, but it was a matter of fact meeting. And as it turned out, then the guy, everything was amicable. He wasn't a bulldog. He wasn't angry. He wasn't mad. And so I'm starting to think, and in fact, he became a subscriber of Two Steps Ahead podcast. But it started to get me to think that maybe sometimes the way we approach people in this long rambling story is maybe it's the way we approach people. We can kind of diffuse that situation. We can diffuse the anger on the other side by just, if we're in a work environment, being professional, doing our job. Don't let the politics and the anger and all that other nonsense, water cooler stuff affect us. Just do your job. Maybe if we approach the situation from a standpoint of being defensive and I'm going to be mad first, just approach it in a professional manner. Maybe that's easier in the work environment because there are, for me anyways, those boundaries. I'm just going to be professional and I'm just going to do my job, and you can act however you want, but I'm just going to continue to do this.
Yeah, there's so many nuggets in there, so many nuggets of gold. I love that story. I haven't heard that before. That's a really great story, because what I gathered from that is that he probably initially in his career was probably a little bit insecure. That first story was probably insecure, probably had a little more bravado than what people would have liked to have, he probably was a little more aggressive than, so then putting people on the defense, or maybe people took it personal. So then they treated him accordingly, right? And then it escalated into the point where here's this guy that has been conditioned, not because society's bad, but because he probably brought to the table this shame, right? This insecurity. And it escalated to the point where now he has been conditioned that people are going to treat him. They're not going to listen to him. They're not going to validate, hey, it's too loud, it's too long. They're not going to validate him. They're going to actually give him more of what he doesn't like. And that's what we don't understand, is that a lot of times we invite more of the very thing that we're trying to get rid of. And that they talk about that a lot in that book, Leadership and Self-Deception, is that when we're in our box, we just encourage people to treat us that way even more. So he probably, not only was he being conditioned by other people that they're not going to listen to me, so I have to be loud and be angry, but now he's also conditioning them that the only time they are going to listen is when it really escalates and it really gets to the point that it's like violent, to get any work done. And here you come along and you listen to him, you validate, it's too loud, it's too long, you validate it, you adjust accordingly, you don't take it personal, and lo and behold, he calmed down because he felt safe with you, he felt like he had a voice with you. And that's what de-escalated the situation. And that's what we don't understand, is that when there's angry people, there's always stuff underneath. But then if I encounter an angry person and I bring my own anger, my own baggage to that conversation, now I'm going to be triggered, and now I'm going to be and take it personal, be on the defense, and now I'm going to lash back, which is going to trigger them, and then they're going to lash back, and we're just going to have this lashback, fest, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and we're going to hate each other, and there's going to be a lot of collateral damage, from the people around us.
See, and the other thing too that for me personally is I'm kind of glad that I did that approach, was because it turned out that these two people in particular were really cool people.
Right.
If I would have taken and listened to what other people had said, exactly, I would have missed out on the opportunity of meeting a couple of cool people. In one instance, the second story, the path was, our connection was short-lived. I only saw him just a few times, and our conversations, like I said, weren't the best for me, as far as, my contract was running out. I wasn't getting renewed. And so I was moving on. But the way we were able just to then talk about life in general and other things, in those couple of meetings that we had, it was a really cool guy to talk to. And same with the host, it was really cool to be able to get to talk to him, get to know him, find out more about him, and tell stories that, he said he's never told people before, just about his college life and things like that. And so again, the point is not to belabor it, but it's like, if we sometimes just put aside I don't know what it is, whatever it is that is causing these issues.
The preconceived idea.
Yeah, the preconceived ideas. You might actually find that there's somebody there that is actually really cool, or somebody that you might like, or somebody that you might get along with, or you never know what positive thing might come of it if you just put away those things, because going into it with that, if I could have gone in with the mindset of being angry and I'm going to lash back and do all this, I would have missed out on a lot of stuff. And then my work environment would have been pretty poor too.
Right.
Because who wants to work in that?
Right.
But I didn't listen to that. And so for me, that was a life lesson to learn, is that, and maybe that's why sometimes I really don't get too upset a lot, because I try to understand what the person might be going through. Now, there's times where I've gotten upset. I remember recently there was a phone call. I started with a text and it turned into a phone call, and I had to jump on somebody. And I don't think I was angry, but more emphatic of, this is what I'm telling you, because what you're doing is wrong and it's affecting me. And you're basically, it came down to, was it libel when you talk bad about somebody that's not true, versus the written one. And so anyway, so I had to be emphatic about something. And so that's the last time I remember getting upset about something. And I think it was a healthy way to deal with it, because they just would not stop, talking about me.
Right.
But so there are ways, don't get me wrong. I do have a bulldog in me if I need it. But again, I try not to take those measures, because you never know what good or positive thing you might miss out on.
Well, I think, and again, I think it's wisdom. It boils down to wisdom. It boils down to whether or not we're taking it personal. It boils down to, because as you were saying that, it's okay to be a bulldog. It's okay to be aggressive. It's not okay to be mean or degrading or shaming. But, Jesus overturned the tables, in the market. That could have been viewed as violent, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
He's destroying, property and people's, stuff. But it was for, a bigger cause. It was for a bigger purpose. It wasn't necessarily about him, personally. So it just boils down to wisdom, and it boils down to, are we, from the 10,000 foot level, are we helping or are we hurting? And we never have the right to call people names or to put them down. But it's certainly okay to be aggressive. It's certainly okay to be excited, and there's certainly okay to be angry about things that are just not right. Violence and abuse and all these things are just not okay. Racism, all kinds of stuff. It's just wrong, right? And so we can be angry about that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. There are things that you can read that I know I get upset about, and and sometimes we just can't do anything about it. There could be a story in South Carolina or back east or who knows where else. There's always a news story somewhere that can really get us enraged about what happened and outraged about it. And sometimes we just can't do anything about it because it's not in our purview to do anything. We're not in that environment. So that makes it even more difficult. But I was going to ask you, I was just curious if you had any thoughts, because I've always wondered this. And again, I've never been in a situation to experience it or have it experienced. It's zero. And what we're talking about with the shame and the control and this or that, when it comes to domestic violence, okay, and I don't know if you can even have an answer for this, but what do you think makes a person, because again, I don't understand two things I really don't understand in life. One is hitting somebody, getting mad. Now, if it's self-defense, you better watch out. But initiating fights, like whatever. But if it's self-defense or you're beating up a family member or something, it's game on and you're going to lose. But outside of that, it's like, I don't have interest in that. So I can never understand hating somebody because of just who they are. But then taking it to the point of where you're violent against them, and so what kind of person does it take? What kind of anger does it take? What kind of issues does it take to get to the point? We always know it takes zero character and a hard heart, but I just don't understand when it comes to the physical abuse of people, how we get to that point, because that has to be really one horrific person to get to that point.
I would, on the outset, just hear, talking about it that way, I would say yes, but think back to Bob's book, for example.
Okay.
No arms, no legs, no problem. So when I published that book, Bob gave me the stories. It's the story of Bob Lojano. He gave me the stories to write, and he talked into a tape recorder, sent them to me in the mail. I dictated verbatim the tape recorder, and then I took his words and I put them into story format. The reason why I'm saying that is because I have never actually talked about this in public. There were many people in his family who are mad at me to this day for the way that, quote unquote, I portrayed Bob Sr., Bob's dad. They're mad at me. And Bob Jr., the gentleman who's wrote the story, has told his relatives on multiple occasions, she didn't write anything. She didn't make this stuff out of a hat. She didn't write anything that I didn't tell her first. I interviewed the dad, Senior, the abuser. I interviewed the grandmother. I interviewed the uncle. I interviewed the doctor, the surgeon that performed all 4 of the amputations. And so for those of you that have not read the book, in the very beginning of the book, Bob's dad was physically abusive. He punched them. He punched Bob and his sister Lisa, and he beat them. And so there were stories in there that I did not include. So there were more stories that Bob told me, and I have them on cassette tape down in my office. And I purposely chose not to include them because I didn't want to demonize his dad, because in the end, Bob learned to love his dad, and he learned to have a relationship. But in those beginning years, from the age of 9 and under, his mom, walked out on them. The dad was abusive, and spankings and all this kind of stuff was a regular thing. Now, what happened is that the grandfather beat the grandmother, and that's where the second generation, Bob Sr., learned it. And then the third generation, Bob Jr., who the book is about, No Arms, No Legs, No Problem. Now he's writing all of these stories. And I talked to Bob's dad, who abused him, and he was a really nice, talking to him years later. Obviously he wasn't still abusing later in life, but he was a really nice guy. And so I really think that for someone to get to that point, they're just feeling so out of control. It's like they just can't control themselves. They have no other way. They've not been taught any other way. A lot of that is like in this case, it was handed down. It went from the grandfather and probably his father, I'm assuming, down to the father, and so it's a legacy that just got passed down. And his family was, when the book came out, Bob's cousins were really mad at me. And I'm like, look, I gave Bob the manuscript. He had full control. If he would have said, take this and this and this out, I would have taken it out. No, because it wasn't my story. So there's a lot of shame involved. There's a lot of, but I think I don't think that people that abuse people around them, I don't think that they're bad people per se. I think that they are so feeling out of control and feeling like they don't have a voice, and they're so full of shame that the only way to give themselves any sort of power or any sort of control is to just lash out in a way that, and a lot of times they don't understand it. Like Bob Sr. he's passed away now, but he read the book that his son wrote. And I asked him point blank, like, is this true? Do you agree with what? And his response was, I had no idea that it affected my son the way that it did until I read it in the pages of his book. I had no idea that my spanking him and doing all this stuff, it was abusive. I had no idea that it affected him that way. But then he also didn't feel, it was just kind of like the way that it was. He felt bad, but he wasn't like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. It was more kind of like a, that's just the way that it was back then. And that, I feel bad, but I had no idea that it hurt him that way and that it affected him that way. So I think that there's just a lot of people are not, self-aware enough to understand the harm that they're doing to other people, and they just don't know any other way to get their point across.
See, I think the other thing too that comes out of that is, and I know Bob's a little different story, but I think he broke that cycle.
He did.
Because I don't remember him being abusive to others.
No, he completely broke that cycle. You can. And then the only reason I'm going to say this is because it was posted on Facebook. And so that gives me permission to say it. But my grandfather was abusive to his wife and my father. My father was not abusive to me in the least, not with words, not with behavior. He was completely the opposite. So again, he didn't pass that legacy down. So sometimes it does get passed down, and then other times it just completely stops. Like the person realizes, like, this is just completely wrong. There's no way I'm going to treat my, family that way. But, again, I was around my grandfather. He wasn't a horrible person. Like I don't know that we can say like a person is good or bad that does that. I think that I think they need help. I think they need counseling and therapy. I think they need love and attention. I think they need validation. I think they need to learn to have a voice without their fists. That's what I think it is. It's like they're just so full of shame and they just don't have a voice. They feel like they don't have any kind of control. And so it just resorts to, I'm just like, there's just nothing else to do rather than just to lash out. They haven't learned any other way.
Yeah, and I think that, and again, I was just curious because, like I said, I've never really experienced anything like that. And again, to have an understanding of what people might go through, because initially, if you hear about domestic violence, and I know domestic violence recently has gone up with the way things are,
yep.
It makes that's where the blood starts to boil. It's like, hey, if you want to take out your vengeance on somebody, it's the old adage, pick on somebody your own size. Yeah. Because it almost seems like it's a bullying situation too, because you're taking advantage of someone who's maybe perceived as weaker or not going to fight back. Mm-hmm. And so therefore you think you can get away with it. Whereas if you're going to take on somebody your own size, well, then maybe you would refrain from behaving this way or having that behavior because you know that they're going to would dish it back. Mm-hmm. And so I guess the point of it is that for me, that's why I always try to understand what somebody is going through before I just lash out, because I never know what it could be. There was a story. I remember I was working as a custodian at a church/school for going through college, and the school would have, it was a elementary school, and they would have after school daycare. And I remember I'd come and I'd work and I'd be cleaning after school, and I'd be there when the after school daycare was going on, and I'd see these kids and I'd see their behaviors. And the behaviors, they weren't the best. They were rambunctious and cranky and, all that. Not all the time, but, you would get that. And so there's one kid in particular, for some reason, I just latched onto him and I'd watch him every day. And there'd be times where he'd be really just out of control. And the way the after-school daycare people treated him, they didn't treat him bad, but I thought they misunderstood him. Mm-hmm. So I did a little bit more investigating because I just felt like it. And it turned out that the mom dropped him off at 6 a.m. As soon as before school daycare opened, did not pick him up until 6 p.m.
Oh my
the
gosh.
last minute of after school daycare. So he's there for 12 hours.
Oh my gosh.
So there's tired, there's hunger, there's I want to be home, there's possibly and there was one time, and this was another parent, but it kind of correlates. She went grocery shopping, did her nails, did all this before she came and picked up her kids. Okay. So then I intervened. I went to the after school people and I'm like, hey, listen, I know you've got a problem with this kid. And I remember the kid's name. And this was years ago. And I remember his name. I said, hey, here's the skinny on the kid. Okay. Maybe you should approach him a little different. And when they found out the story, they treated him with an approach that was more understanding.
Right.
And the kid actually then changed. Like, he still was cranky at times. He was, there's still all the issues, but not as bad because the people were understanding of what he was going through. And I didn't say anything to the parents because it wasn't my place, but I was so close to saying something to the mom, like, get your ass here and pick up your kid.
I probably would have too.
Because it just like blew my mind.
I know, right?
Now, I don't know the mom's situation. Maybe she had to work long hours. I don't know. So that's, again, another story.
We have to be understanding of her story too.
But when you hear things and you pick up little things, it makes you question. But that's the thing. Okay, so then once you have an understanding of somebody, then maybe our approach can be a little different, and then maybe that's where we can help out. So I would every once in a while, I'd bring like, I think a granola bar or something, and I'd slip the granola bar to the kid. I probably shouldn't have done that in hindsight, because who knows if he had a peanut allergy. You know, again, there's a world of things.
Back in the day, we didn't worry about that stuff.
and so, you know, and so again, an understanding of what people are going through, and that might help us. And so that's why I was kind of curious about the question, because my initial response would be, hey, let's exact some vengeance on somebody, because it boils the blood to see this happen. But then again, maybe there is underlying issues that instead of a smackdown, which someone probably deserves, maybe there's another approach that would be better. And maybe there's another approach to, okay, we can help this person through this method, whatever.
Right.
And then again, it goes back to understanding our own anger and our own issues and our own emotions of it. Because if we understand that, you know, by me lashing out, and because again, like when you said Bob's dad was pretty matter of fact about it. This is just how it is.
Right.
And we're like, dude, we're like outraged by it, you know, but that's.
Even though he was terribly hurt by the abuse from his father.
Right.
And then he was so surprised to read in his son's book that it affected him so, you know, in such a deep way. So yeah, we just get trained and conditioned to think in certain, you know, circles that that's just the way things are.
And so for me, what I take from this is that, like we mentioned, first of all, there's healthy anger and there's unhealthy. And so the healthy can be good because it can lead to possible change or positive benefits.
Right.
If we approach it in the correct manner. Then we also have to have the character and the heart, maybe not to get angry when it's inappropriate. So we avoid that unhealthy anger. And then two, it's understanding somebody else and what they might be going through and try to better help them. For example, if it's somebody at work, maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're having a bad life, maybe their experience with somebody else is bad. And so, like you said, like the guy was conditioned to just be angry towards coworkers. I never really thought of it that way, but then maybe that was his condition. And by me just being professional and doing my job, it deconditioned him. I know he was still, when he would work with other people, he'd still.
Well, you validated him. You gave him a voice.
Yeah.
And so he didn't need to yell anymore because you gave him a voice and listened to his voice.
And then the other thing I take from this too is that if we listen to the preconceived ideas or the preconceived notions, we might actually miss out on some cool positive things, whether it be a person, whether it be an experience, whether it be an environment. And so oftentimes we need to check to see exactly what it is that is the root of this. What's our reaction to it going to be? How should we handle it? And do we have the character to walk away? Because I know there's a lot of times people will be in an environment and they think that's what everybody wants us to do, is to lash out in anger and be mad and do something. When character tells us this is the time to just walk away. This is the time to react in love. This is the time to react different from what the crowd wants us to react. And if we take that approach, we might be called chicken or weak. But actually, we're strong because we're able to remove ourselves from the hostilities of the environment and realize what needs to be done and do it.
And I want to make sure that people understand that sometimes it is appropriate to walk away, and sometimes it's appropriate. Sometimes we can't. It's impossible if there's, depending on the situation. But setting appropriate boundaries is a way of standing up for ourselves. Saying, looking at that person and saying, that really hurt me. I'm offended by that, or I don't appreciate being talked to or treated that way, is standing up for ourselves. And that is using the anger in a healthy way, is a way of saying, this is, you know, I'm not going to participate in that anymore. So sometimes setting boundaries is actually, you have to stay and set a boundary. And that's very, very difficult. If you cannot leave, if there's a situation where you just have to, you know, we have this tendency to think that we either put up with it or we leave completely. And there's that gray area. There's that middle ground where, no, we can have a healthy boundary and we can train people to treat us differently. We can literally train people to say, this is not going to work anymore. We're going to do something different. And the way to train people differently is to respond differently. Like you said, just like with that guy, you responded differently and that changed the situation and it changed him. And we feel so powerless sometimes. We think that, oh, this person is such a jerk. There's no way they're not going to change. You're right. They may not change, but I can change. I can change my response towards that person. And when I change my response, they have no other option than to change. They're forced to change. Because if I'm not going to do the dance anymore, if I'm not going to be angry right back at them, if I'm not going to, get into that spin cycle, then they can't do it by themselves. No one can play the game by themselves, right? So if I have a different reaction, it will change the situation. It will. There's no other choice. So the more that we have the strength to not play the game and to not participate and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'll relate to you this way, but I'm not going to relate to you that way. The more that we do that and train them, the more they will calm down and relax or get more animated. And then maybe you do have to leave.
And sometimes that one person, which could be you, can make a difference and make a change.
Absolutely.
We're Two Steps Ahead Podcast. Son Edom, the Incredible Hulk.
Tara Hoke-Shiro.
Yes. Two Steps Ahead Podcast on Instagram at Two Steps Ahead Podcast. My Instagram is at Edom Rocks, EIDEM ROCKS.
And I am at Tara Hoke-Shiro, TARAHOKESCHIRO.
And you can also find us on Instagram television, Two Steps Ahead Podcast, on YouTube, on Spotify. You can also find us on SoundCloud. All those are linked in the bio on our Instagram page. Plus, then you can go to Google, just Google search Two Steps Ahead Podcast, and we pop up. Two Steps Ahead Podcast, highlighting the stuff we've stepped in so you don't have to. Hey, thanks for listening. Do tell a friend. Let yourself be great. Take your passion and make it happen.
Thanks, guys.
We'll see you next time.